My mother, Margaret, is blonde with blue eyes. She is very intelligent, well-mannered, and at the same time very beautiful, with a slender figure. She has 2 college degrees and is generally wonderful, but with a difficult character. That is why my father left us when my brother was only a year old, and that is where my story begins. It was January, the middle of winter, and my mom and I were supposed to go to a small town to visit relatives. I am 20 years old, and my mom, Margaret, is 42 years old. I also have a younger brother, Thomas, who is only 1 year old. Mom had her driver's license and an old Chevy, and the 3 of us hit the road early in the morning, hoping to make it before the weather worsened. None of us wanted to drive, but it was necessary. The first 100 kilometers went smoothly. We listened to the radio and chatted about things to pass the time. Snow-covered fields and frost-covered trees flashed outside the window, and despite the cold, there was something soothing about the silence of the winter landscape. Eventually, we had to get onto the main highway, which took us onto a forest road. The road was paved, but potholed, and it was not an easy drive. Mom tried her best to avoid them, but after an hour of driving on the bumpy road, the car broke down. There was a snowy forest all around us, no one in sight, and the temperature was dropping fast. My mom tried several times to start the car, but all to no avail. Fortunately, after a while, a tractor passed by us and stopped. A man who looked to be about 50 years old got out. He was dressed in an old sweater, simple pants, and boots. He had a large black mustache under his nose and gray eyes. He introduced himself as Frank. He had a kind but weathered face, and there was something reassuring about his calm demeanor. After inspecting our car, Frank said he could tow us to his village, and he would fix it in the morning, and we could continue on our way. My mom was not happy, but we had no choice, and she agreed. Frank towed our car to his barn, which was on the outskirts of a small village that looked almost deserted in the winter cold. He then invited us into his house for tea to warm us up. The house was small but cozy, with a fire crackling in the fireplace and old wooden furniture that gave it a rustic charm. Mother fed Thomas first and put him to bed in one of the far rooms of the house. Frank lived alone, and it was obvious that he was not used to receiving guests, but he was hospitable and kind. While we warmed ourselves with mugs of tea, Frank went and heated the bathtub. From the warmth of the tea and the crackling fire, the strain of our journey began to subside. Soon, Frank returned to our table and continued chatting with my mom. They talked about everything from the difficulties of raising children to life in the village. As they talked, my mom seemed to relax, and I noticed that she was smiling at him more and more often. An hour later, I went to the bathhouse to wash myself. It was a simple wooden structure, but it was warm, and the steam was wonderful after being out in the cold. Mom and Frank stayed at the table and talked. I noticed that Mom was constantly smiling at him, and it was clear that there was a growing bond between them. When I came back from the bathhouse, it was my mom's turn. She went to the bathhouse, and Frank sat for a while before heading there as well. I looked out the window and noticed that Frank hadn't left the bathhouse in about 10 minutes. Feeling slightly uneasy, I decided to check to see what was wrong. I left the house and walked toward the bathhouse, crunching my boots in the snow. As I got closer, I heard my mom's voice. "Yeah, you're doing great, but don't rush so much." I froze, realizing what was happening. I felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, confusion, and a strange sense of acceptance. I went back into the house, realizing that it was Mom's choice and that they seemed to genuinely love each other. The next morning, Mom told me we were staying because Frank turned out to be the good man she had been looking for all along. She looked happier than I had seen her in years, and I couldn't deny that Frank was treating her well. A month later, my mom joyfully announced that she was pregnant with Frank's baby. It was a shock at first, but I could see how happy she was. Frank was immensely happy too, and immediately started making plans to expand the house to make room for the new baby. A year later, she gave birth to a baby girl they named Emily, and our family became so complete that I didn't even realize how it was possible. I went to technical college and moved into a dorm, which was a big change for me, but I was excited to start a new chapter of my life. I was genuinely happy for my mom, but I couldn't stand listening to their love games almost every night, so I decided to stay in the city as long as possible and look for a job there. I found a part-time job at a local diner, which helped me cover some of my expenses, and I spent most of my weekends at friends' houses instead of going back to the village. Despite the hardships, I knew my mom had finally found happiness, and it was worth it. Seeing her smile and watching her with Emily and Thomas made me realize that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but those turns can lead to something wonderful.